What's up everyone, it's Jeremy from Pop Cultureverse, and today I'll be reviewing Final Fantasy VII Remake. Does this remake deserve to stand shoulder to shoulder with the original, or is this the Final Fantasy XIII of Final Fantasy VII games? That's what we call a smart joke there. Moving on. So it should go without saying that Final Fantasy VII Remake is, well, a remake of the classic PS1 RPG Final Fantasy VII, in which you take on the role of Cloud Strife, an ex-soldier and mercenary who's hired by the eco-terrorist group Avalanche to put a stop to Shinra, a nefarious corporation that is bleeding the planet dry of Mako, the lifeblood of the planet, and selling it as a power source, thus slowly killing the planet itself. However, Cloud and company soon learn that Shinra is not but a minor threat as they find a much more imminent threat facing the Earth in the form of Sephiroth, a legendary warrior whose plans not only could tear apart the Earth, but perhaps reality as we know it. Now, the first thing to get out of the way is, yes, this is not Final Fantasy in its entirety. This is only the Midgard chapter. Now, if you've played the original game, you know that the Midgard chapter is only about 1/10 of the game itself. Many have been confused, and some have even said that this is not a complete game. However, this could not be further from the truth. While this is but the first chapter of Final Fantasy VII, it is a full game in and of itself, with over 40 hours of gameplay and content. Much like how Mass Effect 1 is just the first game in the series, and yet is still a fun game in and of itself. Now, for the entirety of the game, you will explore the vast metropolis that is Midgar, including its slums and sewers all the way to the Upper Plate and Shinra itself. The city of Midgar has been greatly expanded upon with new areas to explore, new characters to interact with, and new quests to explore and complete. There are 18 chapters in total, with a new Game Plus, hard mode, as well as new battles and super bosses that await you after completion. Now this of course brings up the topic of expansion. Some felt that the extra quests and elongated dungeons in Remake are more filler, meant to pad out the playtime rather than worthwhile additions. While I can see where these criticisms come from, again I have to disagree, for the most part. Now certain segments of the original, like the sewers and the train graveyard, were small segments your party would pass through on the way to the next story segment. Here, however, they've been fleshed out into full-on dungeons with their own battles and added mythology that make Midgar feel more alive and vibrant and much deeper than it ever has before. However, that's not to say it's all worthwhile, as certain segments, like the drum in Chapter 17, definitely feels like there was some padding going on. The same unfortunately can be said of some of the side quests. While I found most of them to be enjoyable, it's obvious that some were just phoned-in busy work. Go find my cats, etc. Now, I would have rather had fewer, higher quality side quests that add to the story and enrich the lore, rather than useless fetch quests and random monster slangs. That being said, these side quests are much better than some recent installments of Final Fantasy, such as the side quests in Final Fantasy XV. However, they're nowhere near as good as the amazing side quests that were seen in older titles such as Final Fantasy V and the legendary Final Fantasy VI. As for the gameplay, this is where the remake differs drastically from the OG. Remake ditches the classic turn-based battles of the original for an action-based hack-and-slash system more akin to Kingdom Hearts. You move your characters around the battlefield, attacking with a square button, dodge rolling with circle, and performing flashy, devastating combos to take down your enemies. Each character in the game plays different from one another, offering a variety of ways to punish your enemies, and each one feels great. Cloud is a mid-range fighter with long, sweeping sword arcs great for dealing with groups of enemies, or countering with his slower, but much more devastating Punisher mode. Tifa blazes around the battlefield at high speed, delivering swift, powerful punches to single opponents, while being able to charge up her attacks for devastating blows. Barret hangs back, pelting enemies with bullets from afar, occasionally firing off a powerful volley with his charged-up overcharge shot. And Aerith is your tried-and-true mage, casting powerful spells, while pelting enemies with slower, magical bursts as her main attack. At any time in combat, you can press the cross button, which brings up your battle menu. This slows down time to a crawl. From here, the action pauses for a bit, and if you built up enough ATB, you can choose an item, attack with an ability, or cast a spell. This is a great way to catch your breath and plan your next movement of attack. Combat is an absolute treat that is fast and frantic, keeping you on your toes, letting you pull off flashy attacks, and just feel like an overall badass. However, it's not without a few minor gripes that couldn't help but irk me. For one, the camera has a bit of a habit of getting caught up on walls, especially when fighting in closed environments, which leads to a frustrating ordeal of trying to reposition it to see who's getting in cheap shots on you. The The other is the curious decision to let enemies be able to cancel out your spells by attacking you while you're casting. Now, this wouldn't be too big of an issue if you could do it to enemies too, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. If an enemy starts casting a spell, he's gonna cast it unless you kill him. Tied into the combat is the materia system. For those unfamiliar, materia are orbs that, once equipped, give a character access to magic spells or special abilities to use in battle. As you level up and gain experience, so does your materia, giving you access to newer and more powerful spells and abilities. The number of materia that can be equipped is based on the available slots on a character's weapon or armor. Materia greatly expands combat options, as certain materia combinations can have staggering effects, such as giving characters immunity to elements, or status effects, or being able to cast spells on groups of enemies or allies alike. The materia system was a beloved staple of the original, and it's been faithfully brought back here in all of its glory. Another aspect of the materia system is summon materia. Each character can equip one summon materia that allows them to call forth a powerful entity to aid in battle. This summon will stomp around the battlefield as an ally, dishing out pain to the enemies until its gauge runs out before delivering one final ultimate attack before peacing out. Each of these summons are a great aid in battle, often appearing against bosses and tougher enemies, as well as just being pure visual eye candy. Each character has access to 6 weapons over the course of the game. Each of these weapons can be leveled up with skill points, increasing their base stats, increasing the number of materia slots, or giving them passive bonuses such as higher chance for critical attacks or faster MP regeneration. This means that no one weapon is better than the other, as they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. This allows you to pick a weapon that complements your fighting style. Want Cloud to be a strictly physical fighter? Give him hard edge and gain massive strength bonuses in favor of fewer materia slots. Want Tifa to be your mage? Sonic Strikers has her covered with more materia slots and faster MP regeneration at the expense of lower attack power. This opens up your characters to tackle the challenges ahead a variety of different ways if one way isn't quite working for you. Now, another aspect of what made Final Fantasy VII such a masterwork back in its day was, of course, its legendary soundtrack composed by the man, the myth himself, Nobuo Uematsu. I was a little worried that Square might bastardize his original score in updating it, but I'm happy to say that this is not the case at all. Not only is this a faithful update of the original soundtrack with all new remixes and variations of some of Uematsu's classic tracks, but I would dare to say that this remake even exceeds the original. Not only are the various songs instantly recognizable, but many have been given multiple variations to match the mood of the current situation. Every chapter even has its own different version of the main battle theme, Let the Battles Begin, and they are all incredible. I'm not going to go too deep into the story for obvious spoilers, but I do want to touch on a few things. While this is technically a remake, the story is more of a reimagining of Final Fantasy VII. Certain additions were made to the game that alters the narrative and context of certain scenes, with some scenarios being changed almost entirely. This seems like a move by Square in an attempt to keep the story as close as possible to the original, but throw in a few surprises to keep it fresh for a longtime fan. However, whether this is a good or bad thing is going to be entirely subjective. For first-time Final Fantasy VII players, this won't have any real impact on them at all. But for longtime fans such as myself, this could be a deal-breaker. Now, me personally, I have mixed feelings about it. There were some things I liked, like the ending, that doesn't really change anything, but does have greater implications for future titles. However, there were a few things I outright just hated, such as the introduction of ghost-like beings called Whispers that feel ham-fisted to me and almost like it was ripped out of a bad fanfiction. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a game over a decade in the making with one hell of a legacy to live up to. So, the question is, does it? And the answer is no. Remake doesn't live up to his predecessor because it doesn't have to. Much like Cloud and company discover over the course of their journey, Remake is a game that stands on its own and carves out its own path. Sometimes the going gets rough, and there are a few setbacks along the way, but the adventure is incredible and certainly unforgivable. With some of the best graphics to date, an amazing soundtrack, and addictive gameplay, Remake is a game that, despite its obvious flaws, deserves a spot in your library. Final Fantasy VII Remake gets a 9 out of 10, and it most certainly pops. I want to hear what you think. Did Remake live up to all your hopes and dreams, or were you left wanting? Be sure to comment below, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and remember, the unknown journey will continue.